is Tripoint Conversations, and I'm your host, Christina Lowe. And today I'm sitting down with Lawrence Smith. Lawrence is a business and executive coach at Focal Point, where he works with CEOs and leadership teams to navigate growth, complexity, and change. But before that, he's been in the seat himself as a CFO, CEO, and COO, leading companies through growth, turnarounds, and everything in between. Lawrence, I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited about talking with you today.
Yeah, thanks. So before you got to where you are, I want to talk what it was like, we'll say in the beginning, back when you were at Exxon in Houston. What did it look like back then, and what took you there?
Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh. We stopped exporting steel and started exporting people. Mm-hmm. And everybody I knew in my hometown was in the steel business, including my father. And he gave me a piece of advice before he passed and said, go work for a big company and figure out how things are done. Mm-hmm. And so years later, when I found myself in that position, ExxonMobil gave me the opportunity. And it was a big company in every way you think of in the, what I would really say, the late 70s to 90s, in that they spent a lot of time developing their people. They anticipated their people were with them for a career. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in my experience at Exxon, it really seemed obvious to me that they were developing us over 20, 25 years so that we could be extremely productive in the last 5 years of our life.
So they put a lot of development in their people.
They did, and that's what I see missing so much today, that companies don't feel they either have the flexibility or because the dynamics have changed, are not developing their people the way they once did, which means they're not prepared for the next step, which could be a management or a leadership role, but they're also not prepared for the next step, which is when a company grows, you have to do things differently. Mm-hmm. And so all any of us really get now is on-the-job training.
Yes.
Which means we're always driving the car by looking in the rearview mirror.
And you hope that your manager has what it takes to train the next person up.
Yes, I think there's a lot of options, such as podcasts, such as books, classes that people take to try to catch up and augment that on-the-job training, but they still have trouble, I find. I know I did. Have trouble putting that into an action plan and then following through and executing on it.
Okay.
And so that's what I do to help people now.
Okay. But before you got there, you were at Exxon and then you moved to Indiana and Kentucky area. What was that like? What brought you here?
Yeah. So I loved my career at Exxon. It's a big oil company and people have their opinions about it. Mm-hmm. But they were a company that understood how processes were important. They really worked through what the different steps would be needed to be successful, and then they rigorously implemented those. And leadership development, as well as the business, was that way. And so I had a great career. Every 9 months or so, I was doing something different, whether it was a different geography or if a different discipline in the business. And learned quite a bit, always doing something interesting. Mm-hmm. I was at a headquarter job, which was a high-profile opportunity, and they had a business in Indiana that was a joint venture, and they were anticipating they were going to sell it. And so they wanted some of their people in place to do that, or at least a person in place. And I got tapped for that assignment. Now, in truth, my second child was on the way, and it was not something that I really envisioned. Mm-hmm. Being in Houston, where I was at the time, you think of that as a place where oil is present. You don't think of Indiana as the place to go for a career move.
Yeah.
And so not only was it inconvenient personally, but it also didn't seem like it was on the right path for the career I was on. So I actually turned the job down. It turned out to be 4 times. However, it all happened in one day.
Okay.
Because each time I turned it down, I would get a phone call after arriving back in my office within the next hour from the next person up, until finally around 5:15, I got a phone call from the president's office, his secretary, and he said, the secretary said, Jim would like to meet with you. So I head down to the office, and he explains to me that this is a great opportunity and I should take it. And it becomes very clear to me that there's only one answer. And so I said, at the time, I said, how much time do I have to come up with that answer? And he said, well, take your time with it, but I will need it by the end of the day.
Wow.
And
so not much time.
I said, it's almost 5:30. And he said, yes, I leave the office at 6. So let me know by then. So that's how I ended up saying yes to coming to Indiana. And as it turned out, it was a mistake all around in forcing that hand, because about a year later, after we sold the business, they called me back and said, okay, time to come back. Here's the next role we want you to do. And I thought, this is a great place to raise a family. And my vision of raising a family was not moving them around every 9 to 12 months. And so that's when I decided it was time to move on.
What was that like in the company as you came in to help essentially sell the business, but probably you didn't want to come in and tell the company that? So leading a team.
Fortunately, it was a joint venture, and so that was helpful. But you're right in that the way they approached that type of activity was they put me in line management's position. So in essence, I became the CFO of the business, and I was just on loan from the parent company into that role. So it really was a dual responsibility, where I first had to get my arms around the business and learn how to do that for the first time, as well as then start navigating some of you might call it politics, but I really call it the back office piece of the sale, getting ready for how we're going to transition this business and present that business for sale.
Okay. And during that time, did you have someone to lean on, like a mentor to get advice from, or were you kind of doing it on your own?
I imagine there was some formal structure and informal structure in the company, but I did have people that I considered a mentor. In fact, she played a very prominent role in my decision to leave. And it was shortly after we sold the business, I was told I was going to stick around for 60 days to help transition to the new ownership. And they told me about my new role and where I'd be coming back. And I was pretty far along in the decision to leave. And I called my mentor up. I remember it very well. It was in the afternoon, and I told her everything that I was thinking. And I said, I really need your help. And it was one of the most interesting ending of a conversation that I had, because after I finished talking, which was probably for 25 minutes or so straight, she said to me, well, the good news is you figured out what you're going to do. And I said, great. Like, I have really been struggling with this. I'm so glad by me sharing all this that you can now tell me what I've decided. And she said, well, that's the thing. She said, the good news is you figured out what you want to do. Tell you what, call me next week and tell me what you decided.
So she wanted you to come up with that conclusion, yeah.
She knew that, I think she was seeing it right. She knew I made a decision, but I was just struggling with the execution part. And she also probably wisely identified that telling me the answer was not going to be the conclusion for me. But giving me permission by saying, you know the answer, you've shared it with me, you just have to tell yourself what it is. And then hanging up on me as she did, suddenly, really, it didn't make me happy at the first moment, but she was right. I knew what the right answer was for me at that time.
So when you left there, what was next for you?
So I thought I have to reinvent myself. I'd been a big company person, and here I am in a new city essentially without a network, and I have to find a new position. So began the process of looking for a job, and I found myself as a CFO in a company that was a couple $100 million in the heavy equipment area. And as it would happen, they were a publicly traded company and had some SEC violations because of some of their accounting processes. So they were looking for people now who could come in and help them build systems, particularly around business controls and financial controls, so that they did not find themselves in that situation again. And so it was a really good fit. My experience set me up well for that. And what I thought that would be my future. I thought, okay, that's great. I've been trained to be a CFO. So now I just won't be in a big company, but I'll be in this type of company, or maybe this one will be my last one.
Yeah.
It was a really great organization with really great people. And I was extremely happy there. And I probably did start to envision a lifetime in that organization, much like it was when I was with Exxon. And I would develop and take on bigger responsibilities as my career developed. But a couple of years later, the new owners of the business that I sold for Exxon called me up, and they were struggling a little bit with the business that we sold. They were losing both profits and revenue from where they were, somewhat significantly. And ultimately, they offered me the opportunity to come run it. And it propelled me into a different path than I ever anticipated, really moving from the finance side and supporting to being in charge of operating organizations. And once I got in that role, and if I'm honest, I was probably a little naive about what that role and that task was, and probably helped I was young to move into that with gusto. But I found that transformational space, whether you're dealing with a turnaround or you're dealing with growth of an organization, significant growth, not moderate growth, but really growing quickly, that it was a strong suit for me, that I was able to help identify what the strategic path was and not get distracted by some of the other things. And found that was my real strength. And it was only years later that I also found out that my weakness was when we weren't going through transformational change.
What do you think contributed to that success of being able to help turn around businesses like that?
Well, one of the things I think is really important for any business leader is to understand some of their values and use them as decision-making tools, and to have a vision of where you're going. So for me, I've always been on a path of exploring what some of my values are and changing them. And I would even have a challenge sometimes articulating them. But what I knew was going to happen in that business was we had about 130 people. And if we didn't turn this business around, there was going to be 130 people and their families, which, I think I calculated at once, there was 600-700 people that were depending on the organization being successful. And that's, if I'm honest with myself, that was probably the driving force, was not just that I didn't want to let myself down, but I didn't want to let those people down.
Yeah.
And so a value that I tie back into is probably resiliency, which is not going to give up. And the value is adding value to others' lives, making a difference. And to me, that was a skill set that I had, that I could help with, and ensure that everybody could continue on as they had been. And I felt a strong commitment to that. And I kept that not just in my rearview mirror, but, on a Post-it note, if you will, every day I came into the office.
So the bottom line was important, but it was important to then support families and people instead of bottom line to support and line the executive pockets.
Yeah. Look, I see, I started off in finance. So for me, the income statement, how much profit you have, the balance sheet and cash, those are scoreboard items for me. And I like to win. Don't mistake that.
Yeah.
Right? But what I identified is it's a means to an end. Right. And so anytime any of us can tap into what's the real meaning of of what you're doing, and including if you just want to win. Well, what's the meaning of winning? Right? Why is that the goal? That is what I think really drives us through.
Yeah.
And I've learned that lesson so many times over different things I do, whether it's participating in sports or doing things with the family or doing things at work. If I really understand what I'm trying to accomplish, it makes things easier. It makes it more understandable. It helps you figure out where you make sacrifices and where you don't.
So your role now, how would you describe your role and what you do to supporting other CEOs and executives?
So there's a couple different paths, and I call myself a business coach and an executive coach. And I primarily work with people who are growing or trying to grow their career, right? Growing their business or grow their career. And there's some different elements. When I talk to people, sometimes they confuse that word coaching with consulting or some other things. And I bring that up as a way of explaining in that what I really enjoy doing is sitting alongside business owners and executives and not identifying for them what the answer looks like. But much like that mentor I had many years ago, helping them identify what the answer is and helping them discover the answer. And it's that sense of discovery that's fun. But what I've really learned as I do this more and more is oftentimes their answers are different than the ones I would anticipate or sometimes even choose. And so it's like those books that maybe you read to your children, I did to mine, Choose Your Own Adventure books. To me, it's a little bit like that. I have confidence when I sit down with somebody and they present an opportunity or a challenge or a conclusion they have that we're going to explore together. I have confidence we're going to get clarity on that issue and get an action plan in place. But I really don't know what it is going to be until we finish the discussion. And I love that uncovering experience of, oh, that's where we are today. Like, I didn't see that coming. I didn't expect that to be the answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, something that I do see coming. But that journey that we go on together is really fun for me. And that's what I really try to do with my business owners, my executives, is help them go on that journey. Because in reality, much like my mentor said to me, they know what the answer is. They're just trying to figure out how to put it into an action plan or turn it into execution.
And if you go in there, though, and tell them the answer right away, it's not going to be received as well as if you help guide them. And then they need to come up with their answer, though.
I like to think that their answer is often going to be more creative than mine. They're living the business, right?
Yeah.
If you take a business owner, this is their heart and soul. They've built a lot into it. They've spent so much time thinking about it that while I may be able to give them a answer, maybe even the same answer they have, it is much more likely that the answer they come up with is going to be sometimes marginally better and sometimes tremendously better than what I could help them create. And it probably also helps set them up for the next stage, which is really important.
Yeah.
Because the companies I like to work with are thinking about growing pretty quickly. And so you always have to be thinking about the next move and the next move after that.
Have you ever had a company come to a decision where you thought, oh no? And then how did that play out?
You mean where I thought they were making a mistake?
Yes.
So yes, I've been around organizations that sometimes choose paths that it's hard for me to make sense of or see where that works out. One example was a client I worked with that was really struggling with their business. They had grown it. It was in the $30 million range. But they hadn't, it was based on technology and they really hadn't kept up with the technology for one reason or another. And so they started losing some of their revenue, and they built the organization really to be a 30 million plus, right, to grow. And so now they were in a money losing situation. Their challenge, which sounds like a gift, was that they had backers with really deep pockets. And so on their journey to become this company, whenever they ran into a tight spot, their backers always bailed them out. In this case, the backers were less inclined to do that. They had made it pretty clear they weren't going to do it, and that's in part why I showed up in their life. And we talked about some things to right-size the business. We talked about some technology that they had developed that they could put into practice. But in the end, they chose it's going to stay the course. And to me, I look back on that, and I think in some ways that was a real disappointment. In that what ultimately happened is they went back to their backers, multiple times, and the backers just said no. They were exhausted. They didn't want to invest more money. And while it's hard to believe you have a business of that size that just goes away, that's exactly what happened. But it's not my space to tell them how to run their business. In fact, I'm really clear about that with a lot of the businesses that I sit down with, whether they become clients or not. The first thing I do is I almost always congratulate them because they've built something out of nothing. If they're executive in a big company, they've built their career out of really getting a chance, which was, here's a desk, here's a computer, here's what the role is, but they had to perform. So for them to get to that stage, that I show up on their doorstep, they've been successful. And they've been, by any measure, really successful. And so I always congratulate them first for that, in part because it's sincere, and in part because I don't think they often hear it. Then what I want them to do with their business is I want them to make decisions that make sense for them. What I often see is companies that want to grow very quickly and then they slow down for a variety of reasons. And I can see the potential if they want to keep growing. We can all look in the world and see businesses that have grown. So I can see where they can take this, but sometimes it's just too much and they want to slow down or take a break. And I've learned to be really comfortable with that because it's their business. Like I want them to be proud of what they've created, and I want it to be a reflection of who they are. And so if they grow it to a stage and want to take a pause, they should do that. If they want grow it to a stage and then double it again in the next 3 years, like they should do that too. Right? I really want to be there to support them in whatever goal they have. And so I sometimes see decisions that that are curious, but they're only curious from my perspective, and everybody's got their own.
So interesting point of view now. Do you think your the way you lead has changed over the years?
I would hope so.
I
hope that we're always evolving, we're always learning, and I'll say age has an aspect of it, but I think it's experience that has an aspect of it. And the biggest change that I've seen is probably in a growing organization how you develop people. When I first was running an organization and it was a turnaround situation, I identified we probably need some different skill sets. And there's a sense of urgency that led to this. But a colleague of mine, one of my board members, said to me one time, he said, I finally got it, what you're doing. You either change the people or you change the people. And I was probably a little bit more inclined that if somebody didn't have the skill set or was struggling to execute, well, I'll hire someone over them, find another role for them, replace them in some way. And I'm much less inclined to do that today. In fact, one of the founding reasons that I decided to really make business coaching, executive coaching, my mission and my goal was because I was watching people in organizations that had been there for a while and leadership losing trust in them because these gaps that they had, these gaps that they have from only having on-the-job training, but now that the business is growing, they're trying to rise up into that position. And the owner or the CEO or whomever is that leadership role is losing confidence in them because they think, I gave them a shot and they didn't perform. Maybe I gave them a second shot and they didn't perform. And as I looked at it, I said, well, of course they didn't perform. They don't know how to perform. What have we done to really help them learn that? And so this question of have I changed my leadership is I probably understand that scenario better. Maybe the world's a little different because people aren't developing as much. Maybe the world's a little different because I do think companies grow faster now than they used to. And that opportunity is there. And so there's that opportunity for the company's growth to outpace individual growth a little easier. And I look more to now identify, okay, what is it? What was the gap? And then ask myself, is that a gap we can close? Is that a gap we can close with some skills training and some knowledge? Is that a gap we can close with mindset? Is that a gap that's going to be really hard to close? And if so, how do I explain that to an individual to give them what I consider a fighting chance?
But I can imagine it's so beneficial to the corporation or organization because the employees that they're helping, close the gap and develop, they have a lot of business know-how and knowledge. And so the alternative is to let them go and then hire someone else in. But you're going to do some type of development and training. So it's either take someone that knows the company and the products and the services and develop that skill set, or have to hire someone else and then train them.
Yeah, I think that's where the current labor market even makes that more challenging. That's what you're identifying, more costly for sure. How I usually describe it is those business owners or leaders have somebody on their team that's bought into the mission, vision, values. You're not staying with a company for 10, 15 years if you're not bought in some way. And if you haven't deposited in the trust bank of your leader and they haven't deposited in your trust bank. And so to me, that's what I hate to see get exhausted is not just the cost and the time of developing a new person, but how do you build that trust? How do you refill that? How do you find somebody who's truly aligned with your mission, vision, values? You've had enough experience now with that employee that their strengths and weaknesses, where they're bought in, where they're not bought in, and you have a rapport that comes from that trust. That's a shame to pass by.
Yeah.
I think at a minimum, you look for another role that they can fit in so that you have the right people on the bus and in the right seats. That's what I think you need to do at a minimum, because otherwise, what a waste of an investment that you've put in there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And who typically reaches out to you? Is it the CEO of the business, or is it the person that is seeing that there's a gap and needs that support?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I would say it's the people that reach out to me oftentimes are not the CEO, but the decision maker is usually the CEO. The CEO's got to be comfortable with what their goals are, where they stand. Well, I look at it this way. Do they know where they stand today? Do they know where they're going? And do they understand why? And if that isn't clear, it's going to be really hard for the organization to accept some outside guidance to help propel them towards that goal.
Yeah.
If that is clear, then I think there's a variety of options. One of them may be an executive coach, or it could be some other type of support that you might be looking for, depending on what your goal is and why you're headed there. So, but I often do have conversations with people who are like, oh man, my organization needs that. And that's probably something that hasn't been explored a lot, but I wonder how many leaders, how many CEOs, how many business owners realize their team is talking about, hey, we really would like some support. We really like some guidance.
Yeah.
But they're not sharing that upline. And so sometimes what I do find, and I've built some presentations to support this group in particular, is the HR team. And that comes from actually having a career, like a lifelong career now in different businesses, and watching my HR individuals who got into the business because they cared about people. But more and more and more now, I think over the last 20 years, they are being forced into a position that's very transactional, very administratively burdensome, having to do maybe primarily recruiting because of the turnover that is happening in so many businesses. Or as my one colleague declared it, they're the ones with the whistle around their neck, blowing it when someone does something wrong. And which is the exact opposite of why so many of them are in the business.
Yeah.
And so I have built some talks and some information that I can give them that I call it be the HR hero again, to take into the marketplace, or take into their business, I should say, that they can quickly and easy give some bite-size help to individuals and really guide them along the way they've always wanted to.
But just don't have the time to anymore.
But just don't have the time or the mandate to do it. And the more I can partner with them, I think the stronger the organization is, because as I was talking with a colleague just the other day, when an organization's putting their strategic plan together, I really believe if they don't have a human resources goal, or if they don't have a finance goal, for example, as well, some of these, what they consider support departments, they probably need to look again at their strategic plan. It's something I like to bring into their organization. It's not just the operational goal or how much revenue or profit we're going to make.
So what if someone was wanting to do something similar to what you're doing now? What advice would you give them?
So one of the advantages of being in this business coaching or executive coaching space is each of us bring a unique twist and skill set to what we do. And so mine, I find, is I oftentimes when I'm meeting someone for the first time, I don't tell them I'm a business coach. I tell them I'm a recovering CEO. and I do that because that's how I come across when I'm working with someone. I tend to be direct. I act with urgency. I will help them get to an action plan, and probably will be unyielding if I don't get to an action plan, right? Like we will have an action plan at the end of our discussion. So if someone's thinking about this, I would think about how do they want to be interacting with people? Is their goal to help them drive revenue and goals? Is their goal to help with the marketing plan? Is their goal to be on the human resources side? Is their goal to work more on the softer sides, the organizational development pieces? What do they want to bring to the organization? And the more an individual can get crystal clear on that before they jump in, I think the more comfortable that transition will be for them, and the more successful they'll be.
What advice would you give to yourself early on in your career?
So much of my career was spent in big organizations, particularly early on, or internationally, outside of my city. And what I would really encourage myself to do is constantly be thinking about a network that you can lean in on for support and guidance, but also that you can just constantly cultivate and utilize. It may be a place that you reach out to for help, like I did with my mentor, but it may be a place they reach out, because every one of those conversations, I learned something new.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Now I have a section called lightning round, quick answers. One decision you made that felt small at the time, but changed everything.
Small decision that I made was the first time I was a CEO, I identified that I had a half dozen major suppliers, and every quarter I sat down with those major suppliers and I asked a simple question, which was, what could we do better? And about a year and a half later, I can give you numerous examples, but in one particular example, about a year and a half later, I identified that what was critical to one of my suppliers was accessing a specific market that I was in that they could not do. And they were a high-priced supplier to me. They were probably the last of the group of 6 that I was meeting with on a regular basis. But as soon as we identified that, and I asked a question of something like, what would that mean to you? Or, something along that line. I don't remember the exact question, but I do remember the exact instance because it happened between us sitting down to dinner and ordering a cocktail. And it was certainly before we finished that first cocktail that we put together a plan that took my business that was about $100 million at that point and added $10 million to that business literally overnight.
Wow.
And came with a decent profit margin on it as well. And it was simply this alignment of what their needs were and what our needs were. And it just became like an obvious answer.
Yeah. And working together for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's something that you used to believe about leadership that you don't anymore?
I'll go back to something I talked about earlier. I used to think you had to change the people out. That if you're moving quickly, that the best answer was to change the people out. And I think there's a variety of reasons why that's not true anymore, and maybe wasn't true then either.
And there's an opportunity to focus on development versus changing them out.
Yes.
What do you do when you need to reset after a hard day?
Well, I don't know that I have too many hobbies. My hobby is exercise, and my wife will tell me that I often am a little grouchy if I haven't exercised in a couple of days. So I think anybody who knows me would say it's probably when I go out running or exercising in some way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something your family or close friends would say about you that might surprise people.
I think my family might talk about a version of my patience that sometimes people see in me, but the reality is I'm not very patient. I'm always striving for something, but I realize that sometimes taking a beat or a moment to let someone catch up allows you to move faster. And so I think my family sees that more often than other people do, that only see me for a short period of time or in a certain setting.
Okay. Favorite place to travel?
So that would be a challenging one for me. So my favorite thing about travel is I like the experience, and I like it to be different experiences. So if I had to pick, so I'll tell you a little about myself. Like my vision, someone asked me just this the other day where I would retire to. I was talking to a business owner out in Oregon, and he was asking me why I do business in Oregon. And I said, well, I'm thinking about where I'd want to live. And he said, oh, you picked Oregon. And I said, well, here's the reality. I would like to live in Oregon, but probably for a year.
Okay.
I like to experience it. I like to live in the mountains for a year. I like to live at the beach for a year, because I like to go through both the tourist season and then the off season, and just experience like what people living in that space experience. But my short answer to that question is Charleston, South Carolina. And my reason is every summer I go to the beach. And when I got remarried, we were looking for a place that we would spend our beach vacation. And some places I've been to were a little stuffy, a little formal. Other places were a little too informal. And I found Charleston to be the right mix.
Okay.
And so it became a place of like, let's go visit it and to see it, because we need a beach place. And it's now become a place I visit every year.
Nice. Anything else that you would tell someone that's advice that you would give them that you've learned along your journey?
Well, I know a little bit about your mission, which is to help people understand how or when or if they could transition from a big corporation into doing something on their own, more entrepreneurial or smaller. And what I see so much is that people that are on the fence about that, it's the hesitation. There's all kinds of hesitation or reasons that you can come up to not do it. So a colleague had said this to me, and I use this. I think this is somewhat of a motivator, but if you believe there's true evil in the world, if you believe there's a devil, so to speak, then what would be the best way to really undermine people or hurt them? And I think that would be to take away their hopes and dreams. So what I would encourage somebody that's in a organization or thinking about entrepreneurial, I would take to them, don't let the bad guys win. Yeah. Recognize that hesitation, that lack of self-confidence, that self-doubt, whatever they're experiencing that's holding them back. Recognize that is something that is intentional to hold you back, and don't let it win.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had a great time.
And thank you everyone for listening to Tripoint Conversations. Until next time. Thanks for listening to Tripoint Conversations. Make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with a friend or someone who's navigating their own next chapter. And if you know a story that deserves to be heard, or maybe that story is yours, head to tripointstrategicgroup.com and send me a note. I can't wait to keep this journey going with you and introduce you to more incredible people who are shaping their communities one story at a time.